Andy, why do you make art?
Because I want to, because I enjoy it, but also it's a way of saying something, kind of, and I think mainly it's a way for me to learn, kind of, and to figure things out in my own head.
Yeah.
So I think that about sums it up. To be an artist is to, well, it's to question things.
Excellent. What ideas, interests or concepts inspire your work?
Being a printmaker, I guess, although I dabble in other things, what the sort of main interest around that is the idea of kind of, or the relation between printmaking and sculpture and performance. I think when you're making a print, you're kind of, it's kind of quite aggressive in the way. You're stamping something most times. You're making an impression into paper. It doesn't just sit on the surface. And whereas painting, you're working on the surface, but you're building out of it. In printmaking, you're usually pressing into it. So you're kind of casting or making a mould in some way, shape or form. I find it really hard to make work and kind of what to make work about. So a lot of what I make is just that kind of, that bit in between the process, yeah, that they're kind of, you know, where is the art? Is it what's made or is it the making, which is kind of a performative thing. I think I did a project when I was studying. For a year I put an etching plate on my desk and I didn't directly draw onto it, but it recorded the marks of kind of whatever else I was doing at the time. So it was almost like collecting data.
Yeah.
And that carried on throughout the year. So it was on my desk for 4 to 6 weeks, and then I would print it, and then I would coat it again and continue. So I've got this build-up of kind of all of the action that took place on my desk. And they ended up being turned, because they were desks, they ended up just being turned back into desks. So the prints were laminated back onto the desktop that they were made on, and I just got a new desktop. So I've got a collection of desktops. Taking those desk prints, they kind of negated the actual things that were being made. So it was that kind of, there's that question that is, you know, why do you make art? What is the purpose of it? Which, you know, isn't really a purpose of it. It's something you do, and that's fine. It took me a long time to get to that point where it doesn't have to be kind of have a purpose.
Yeah.
Kind of, but it's still scary every time. And I suppose I'm sort of thinking about the idea of prints and sculpture more now, and how print can be more of a sculpture than a print. So that's from the sort of traditional take on printmaking, where it's much more closely related to kind of drawing and painting and kind of the image rather than that idea of the surface.
How is a print like a sculpture?
Or
when?
I mean, like I said, you're making a print, you have a matrix which is usually made up of, you know, it has height and depth. It is a 3D thing. Kind of a drawing is essentially a flat thing, but when you're doing a print, you're pushing it in to the paper. But you can go, I mean, where does that sort of stop? Where printing kind of goes into paper making as well. Paper making, you can cast paper, and an old technique they used to do for newspapers when they used the movable type is called flunging. So, because they only had so much type and they had to do a newspaper every day, they would set the page up in the metal type, put a sheet of essentially paper mache on it, and bang it in to get the impression of the type. And then they would cast that in metal for the day's paper, which means as soon as they had the paper kind of cast of it, they could sort the type again and start the next day's paper. So kind of somewhere around there. And why does a print have to be flat, and why does it have to be in a frame? And, you know, kind of, why can't it be something sculptural as well, or something that wraps around something?
Is there any
story that you've heard about, or any person that's inspired you in terms of thinking about things differently or doing things differently?
Yeah, I think that there's a guy, well, he's dead now, but a guy called Utah Phillips he was a hobo and an anarchist, and he was a storyteller, and he essentially kind of realised very young on, which is kind of the start of the 1900s, that the history he learnt in school wasn't kind of a history that he could relate to. It was somebody else's history. And so he basically spent his whole life travelling on railways and speaking to people, going to political rallies, and then passing on these stories. He never wrote them down. He would just go to places and he would say them. And he's got an archive of recordings, and there's something about 3,000 stories, but they're all up here in his head. And sometimes he sings them, sometimes he just sort of says them, and some of them are kind of, they're like Raymond Carter stories, they're sort of 3 sentences, where others are kind of very in-depth stories.
So what is it about him, like what caught your attention about that? What interested you about it?
He talks about the long memory and about storytelling, and the idea that these stories are passed because they'll never be accepted by the kind of norm, so it's up to people to pass them along, kind of for people who are interested in them. I think it was as much about his character. I admired his character, but also I have an interest in history and alternative histories, and I don't know why, I've got a very big interest in American history and American folklore, kind of a lot of the music I listen to, and there's kind of people who turn up like John Hammer, he was a railway worker who, when they brought in the pneumatic hammers, he basically challenged the guy who had it, saying that he could beat it, and he did beat it, but he died. He basically worked himself to death, kind of. And there's all another thing, sort of the machine, the person, kind of the action of a person is machines basically mimic them, kind of, and a lot of that is in printmaking as well, but kind of, bringing it more to now and sort of the digital, it's kind of, they've made all the machines that can do what the physical body can do, so kind of I'm quite interested in that idea that the computer is the new brain, so we don't even, it's kind of, technology has succeeded in kind of taking away the body, and now it's kind of going for the brain almost, or something like that.
Yeah. What doesn't hold true for you? What myth would you like to see exposed?
That there is such a thing as utopia, and kind of the idea that technology and everything we do will always make things better. Kind of, I think that's quite interesting, because it's kind of, you can kind of, depending on what you're talking about, but you can get classed as a Luddite and sort of saying, you're denouncing all technology and everything, but kind of, there is this sort of world thing that advancement is better. I think it's good to sort of go, well, actually, is it?
What traditional modes of thought or art are you interested in subverting?
I think I'm quite traditional, actually. The artist isn't really classed, they're sort of saying an artist isn't really an artist, it's not the person in the studio, and I'm like, well, actually, why not? So, kind of, especially...
The artist is the artist.
The artist is the artist in the studio, there's nothing wrong with that, especially, I work in education, I see how it's kind of evolving and changing, and while I agree with most of it, there's some of it that I don't agree with. Kind of, it's when you're learning, it's not just kind of the physical act of doing, let's say. You're learning how to learn when you're learning. I think that's an important thing, which gets missed out a lot when they're kind of trying to take it more away from the sort of tactile way of making art. I think making is extremely important, which is something that is kind of getting pushed more and more to the back. And there is nothing wrong with having a skill. I think skills are very important, not just for them themselves, but when you learn a skill, there's certain limbic things going on. That you're not just learning that skill, you're learning how to learn skills and kind of how to think. The way I teach here, I'm kind of very full, teach them how to do something well, and they'll learn a lot more than just doing that, rather than it being kind of a bit of a churn out and just get it done, help them get it done, kind of, so they've got something at the end. And it's like, well, you know, a number of times I can kind of sort of think, well, what did you learn kind of when you're in those situations?
What is your definition of success?
Being able to do what I want to do, being happy doing what I'm doing. I think that's about it.
What gives you cause for optimism?
Learning something or discovering something through it, that kind of keeps you going and kind of, on